All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Ryan. I'm the Policy Director at Housing Alliance Delaware. Welcome to the Day for Housing. We're so excited to have you all here. Um, I am going to start off with just a couple kind of technical things that are important to the day. So first, Rachel already put this in the chat and I appreciate it. If you are not speaking, we're asking that you keep yourself muted. We set this up as a meeting because we want to have the ability to see each other and really participate. However, we want to be respectful of our speakers. So if you can make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking and during the time when the speakers are speaking, we appreciate that. We also wanted to note that you can set up your Zoom so that you can see just the speaker. So if you are overwhelmed by the number of people on your screen and not comforted by our numbers, please make sure that you set your settings so that you can just see the person who is speaking. We will have two presentations this morning, and then we will be going into breakout rooms. When it comes time for breakout rooms, I will explain this again, but you will be pushed into breakout rooms. You just have to stay in this meeting for the entire morning. You don't have to do anything. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. We're really excited to have everyone here. I'm going to hand it off to Sarah Kiefer, who is the board president of Housing Alliance Delaware, to welcome everyone this morning. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Day for Housing. First and foremost, let me thank all of you for what you do to serve the community, particularly in this last very difficult year. It's been a challenge for everyone, particularly in the housing front. Our mission at Housing Alliance is to advance housing opportunities, end homelessness, and promote vibrant communities. Part of that mission is the focus of today. It's advocacy. Anyone can be an advocate, and part of today's discussion and our breakout sessions about both state and federal initiatives, our aim is to give you and your organizations the tools to be an effective advocate, as well as to create an opportunity for all of us to collaborate. So again, I'm so pleased to see all of you here, and I thank you for joining us. And here's to a very productive and educational day. I'll turn it back to Sarah Ryan.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker of the day. So Tori Burnett is a senior organizer for housing advocacy. So she's the housing advocacy person at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So she mobilizes all National Low Income Housing Coalition members to do federal policy advocacy on housing. But she's also local to us. She is a former UD grad. She's a former public ally from Delaware. And she also worked for 4 years as the communications and program manager at Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. So she's here today to give us an overview of what's happening on the federal level and to talk to us about housing advocacy from the perspective of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So thank you, Tori.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. Really happy to be speaking to Delaware folks. I am going to just share my screen, so give me one moment while I do that. Okay, so I'm assuming people can see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, great. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm Tori. I'm the senior organizer for housing advocacy at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I'm going to talk to you all today about some of the housing provisions that have recently passed. And then in the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as in the December 2020 package, because it's a big deal and a lot of that money is getting rolled out right now. And I think it's important just to have some basics on, how that's going to look and how that can be used. And then I'm going to talk about the fiscal year 22 budget, specifically as it relates to HUD, as well as talking about the infrastructure bill and where we think that's going. And then I'll wrap it up with some exciting information about our huge campaign called the House Campaign that we're launching right now, and which has a lot of great momentum. So for those not familiar with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, we are a nonprofit and we focus on the lowest income people. So we don't represent any housing industry or group. We represent the folks with the lowest incomes, and we work to ensure that they have access to safe, affordable, decent, and accessible housing. So I am going to, like I said, first talk about what was in the two most recent packages as it relates to housing provisions. So in December 2020, there was $25 billion for emergency rental assistance that was passed. And then the American Rescue Plan Act was passed in March. We received $21.5 billion for emergency rental assistance, but it also included, I think it's pretty historical to say that it's pretty amazing that we're getting almost 50 billion for emergency rental assistance. So I think we have a real opportunity here to make sure that, people in need during this COVID crisis really get helped, and that we utilize those funds in the best way we can. But we also received $5 billion for emergency housing vouchers, $5 billion for homeless assistance, $10 billion for homeowner assistance, $120 million for fair housing and counseling, as well as $5 billion for utility assistance, and $350 billion for state and local fiscal recovery funds. So I'm going to focus on what's highlighted in blue, since we focus on the lowest income renters and resources for those folks. And like I said, a lot of this money is just starting to roll out right now. So we, we don't have all the details of best practices yet, but as those emerge, we will definitely make that known to folks. So just in terms of the housing vouchers, like I mentioned, there was $5 billion for housing vouchers, which means that there will be 70,000 new emergency housing vouchers specifically targeted to help individuals and families experiencing or at risk of homelessness, as well as those fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, find safe, stable housing. So these vouchers will work a little bit differently than housing choice vouchers. PHAs are actually, public housing authorities are actually required to work with continuums of care to identify eligible families and individuals and connect them to housing. And then also public housing authorities will receive $3,500 per voucher, which they can utilize to help the person find housing. They can use for security, utility deposit, application fees, etc. So the public housing authorities can really develop a list of what that money can be used for. And then also a lot of the requirements that relate to housing choice vouchers actually are going to be waived as well for these vouchers. And we have more details, which I can drop in after my presentation on the guidance from just the guidance that was released about these vouchers. So in terms of homelessness assistance, $5 billion was released through the Home Investments Partnership Program. And so this funding can be used for tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, as well as the acquisition and development of non-congregate units. We're hoping that this money, instead of being used to develop more congregate sheltering, is actually used to develop more permanent supportive housing, which is a big need right now. And then there's also the state and local fiscal relief, which actually is a really big point right now. So a lot of governors and state governments are trying to figure out at this moment what to do with this money. So the money can be used for housing, which I think is huge. And so a lot of advocates actually are already trying to get their governor to commit to using that money for housing. So in Vermont, they're going to be using 190 million of this funding for housing, to build housing, and also for homeless assistance. Maine, they're going to be using about 200 million. So like I said, they're already coming up with plans. And so I think right now is a time to influence what happens with this money, and to do advocacy and say, hey, this money, can be utilized with the emergency rental assistance to build maybe some supply and build more permanent housing, and be utilized for acquisition and that type of thing. So, and again, there's 350 billion in this money that's going out to the states. And then lastly, there's the emergency rental assistance, which again, we received 47 billion. So the tranche 2 is coming out now from the American Rescue Plan Act, and it is more flexible, which is really great. So it actually provides for direct to tenant assistance. So tenants can receive that money first before actually going to the landlord. So in prior installments of the rental assistance money, the landlord had to be asked first, basically, and then in some instances, programs could decide whether the tenant could then be reached out to if the landlord rejected that money. But this time, for the round 2 ERA2 funding, the tenant can be reached out and get that assistance directly, which is really good because a lot of tenants we've seen were being denied from their landlords and then that was it. Then they didn't have any other recourse for being able to stay in their homes. So we've also been tracking what programs have been doing with this money and looking at best practices. And so our best practices are really this money should be as flexible as the program should be as flexible as possible. That self-attestation should be accepted, that there should be a limit to burdensome documentation requirements, and that applications should be kept short because again, this money is emergency money. It's meant to go out fast to people who are in emergencies, who could be evicted at any moment, because even though there is a moratorium on evictions are still happening throughout the country. And so we really need to make sure that this money gets out and protects people as soon as possible. And then we also recommend that ERA programs partner with local organizations because those organizations are connected to marginalized and hard to reach communities and can perform the outreach and assist tenants in filling out these applications. In a lot of instances, the applications have been hard for tenants to fill out. And so, having those resources is vital. So next I'll talk about the infrastructure bill. So this is really exciting. So there's a chance to get infrastructure, including hopefully housing, passed this year. And so there were bipartisan negotiations between the Biden administration and Republicans. They're still happening, although they're slowing down a bit. So the president originally proposed a 2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal that included a large amount of funding for housing, which is really exciting, 40 billion for public housing as well, capital. But the Republicans had proposed 568 billion for their infrastructure package. Actually, a lot of that money had already been allocated for the year. So it was really like 200 billion for infrastructure. But they're going back to the drawing board. So the White House released a 1.7 trillion counteroffer to the Republicans, 568 billion. But because it contained tax increases on corporations and the wealthiest Americans, Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, said it was a non-starter. So Senate Republicans are working supposedly on another counteroffer close to $1 trillion. Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, though, said that housing should not be considered part of an infrastructure deal. So it casts doubts on whether housing will really be included in a bipartisan infrastructure package if one is passed. Senator Chris Coons has been urging his Dem colleagues to take a smaller deal and then use reconciliation to pass larger measures and more bold proposals like daycare programs and whatnot. Some senators are worried that if the bill is split into two, so if we have a small infrastructure package and then a larger reconciliation package with bold proposals like daycare, for example, that the bold proposals won't get passed and that it will just a small infrastructure package will be the only thing that gets done. So right now there's still, it's still not really clear whether a bipartisan package will get passed or not. I think that's very much still up in the air. I would recommend reaching out to your senator and asking him to really support housing investments and to really show that there is a need for housing, long-term housing, that housing is infrastructure, that it's really important. And just because we have resources for the emergency for COVID, there was an issue, there was an affordable housing issue we know before COVID, right? And so we still need to address those needs. And so that's desperately why we need housing included in any infrastructure package and bold housing investments. And then in terms of timeline, we've been getting conflicting reports. So Leader Schumer supposedly said he wanted to bring forward a big, bold infrastructure bill before the July 4th weekend, but then there's also been talk that maybe there will be just a reconciliation bill enacted by the end of September, which could conflict with, moving forward some appropriations bills. So timing is quite uncertain right now, as well as whether there's going to be a bipartisan bill or not. So unfortunately, I don't have any conclusions on this route. Just a lot of things are still up in the air in terms of this bill. And then in terms of the budget, so President Biden is going to release his budget request for fiscal year 22 on Friday. He had already released the budget blueprint, which was basically just his idea of like, oh, here's some, things that I want in the budget, but he's really going to flesh that out in his full request this Friday. So in the budget blueprint, we saw that HUD programs received a $9 billion or 15% increase from fiscal year 21 appropriations, which was huge. Really exciting. This is the first year actually that there is no restriction or constraint on discretionary spending for the first time in 10 years because there is no Budget Control Act. So we have a really big opportunity to get, again, some large housing measures passed. President Biden included actually 200,000 additional housing choice vouchers in his proposal. He included funding homeless assistance grants at $3.5 billion, $500 million above what was funded in fiscal year 21. There's increases for home investment partnerships program. There would be an additional 2,000 new homes for seniors and people with disabilities, and increases in money for the capital, public housing capital repairs, increased funding for community development block grants. So the proposal looks really great and will be, we assume that a lot of these, what was in his budget blueprint will appear in his budget requests on Friday. And then the budget request does have little bearing on how appropriators ultimately divvy up federal funding, but it does signal the administration's priorities and it marks the official kickoff of the appropriations process. So House appropriators are going to plan markups in June and July, and then hopefully with the goal of passing all 12 spending bills before the August recess, but oftentimes, the budget process gets held up, so we will see what happens. And then lastly, I did not want to do that. Okay. I wanted to talk about our house campaign, which I'm really excited about. I think a lot of folks in our network are really excited about because it's basically our big, bold campaign for long-term solutions. We see right now we have a really big opportunity to get housing policy passed and to get a lot of investments for affordable housing. And, you know, we haven't seen an opportunity like this in a very long time. So we really want to take advantage of this opportunity. So we're proposing that we expand rental assistance to make it universally available to households in need. We increase and preserve the supply of affordable rental homes. We provide emergency rental assistance to households in crisis. We see, you know, how the COVID money has been working, and we would like to see emergency money be a permanent thing for people that are in crisis. And then we also would like to see renter protections, because we've seen the need. You know, even with an eviction moratorium, people are experiencing evictions and a lot of their rights being violated. So we do see a need for more renter protections to be established. So as opportunities arise, we're pursuing different parts of this agenda. Right now with the infrastructure bill and the budget, we have a chance to pursue the supply side as well as the universal rental assistance side of this agenda. So we're working on that right now. But for folks who want to learn more about it, you can go to nlihc.org/house, and I will put it in the chat as well. So that is it for my piece. This is my contact information, dberet@nlihc.org, my phone number, and then that's my Twitter handle. So please feel free to email me. That's my job, is to help answer questions and connect you to the right resources. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Tori. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Rachel Stucker, the Executive Director of Housing Alliance Delaware, and I am going to make sure everyone knows that if they have a question for Tori, we have a few minutes set aside for her to answer questions. So if you have questions, please place them in the chat, and I can make sure to ask Tori those now. So I'm going to kick off a brief Q&A session with you, Tori, by asking you, if there was, you know, here in Delaware, if there was one thing that you would say that housing advocates here in our state should contact our federal delegation about, our Congress folks and our senators down in DC, what would you say that thing should be, and what our message should be about that?
Yeah, so I would say that, again, it should be including housing in any infrastructure package. And specifically, we want to see $70 billion in public housing capital, $40 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund, and universal housing assistance for vouchers. So we'd like to see, you know, again, those are our three priorities. We really want to see, again, this infrastructure package seems to be a really big opportunity right now. And like I mentioned, we've seen the need. There's still, you know, before COVID, there was still affordable housing issues. There was still a large need for housing, especially for the lowest income people. Nowhere in the United States is there enough housing for the lowest income folks, and they're extremely cost burdened. So we need housing, and this is a really great opportunity to get that done.
Thank you, Tori. We have a question in the chat from Cheyenne Miller. Okay. How does the National Low Income Housing Coalition feel about a national tenants bill of rights like the one proposed by Homes Guarantee?
I am not super familiar with that, but if you want to send that over to me, Cheyenne, I can take a look. I know we definitely support tenants' rights and expansion of tenant protections.
Great, thank you. Would you be able to speak a little bit more about what universal housing voucher is, what that means, and how that's different from how housing choice vouchers are currently administered?
Of course, yeah. So we basically universal housing assistance or universal vouchers means that right now we have a gap. So for every for every for every 4 folks, every 1 out of every 4 people right now receives housing assistance, like through a voucher or through project-based rental assistance. And so our goal is to fill that gap. So we want to see 4 out of 4 people receiving universal. We want to see 4 out of 4 people receiving vouchers or housing assistance. So basically, it's that effort to fill that gap and make sure that everyone who qualifies for a voucher actually gets a voucher.
So when you say 4 out of 4, you mean 4 out of 4 people who qualify?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So 3 out of 4 people in need of housing assistance are currently not getting it.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. I have another question in the chat from Joe Meyer. With the substantial disparities in home ownership, could that be included in the National Low Income Housing Coalition's Housed campaign?
So we definitely agree that there are major disparities in home ownership. Our focus, we are not experts in home ownership, so we focus on people that make $0 to $10,000 a year, as well as, you know, folks that are above, that do make above that income. But our focus is primarily ensuring that the very lowest income renters have assistance, because those are the folks with the greatest need. And often we find that home ownership is not, doesn't make, you know, is not an option for people with the lowest incomes. And so that's why our focus is on rental assistance.
And Tori, thank you. It looks like Cheyenne Miller has included a link in the chat. I have not taken a look at it, but folks should feel free. I imagine, Cheyenne, that is related to your question. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Cheyenne.
I am just looking at the chat here. Does anyone else have additional questions for Tori? So I'll ask another question then, Tori. At the national level, you work with communities throughout the country who are working to administer all of this new funding and get help to the people who need it most. Are there certain practices or certain ways of using that funding that you think would, based on your kind of scan of the national landscape, would have the most impact? And where do you see Delaware fitting in there?
Yeah, so we are definitely encouraging, so a lot of the rental assistance funding, we're encouraging again for that to be like very flexible as possible, so that it can get out to folks right away. And then, you know, we'd like to see permanent supportive housing be utilized for the home funding and other funding sources to build some permanent supportive housing to provide, you know, folks that are experiencing homelessness or have great need so that they can, you know, live in housing that's permanently affordable. We do have state and local, actually, I did have a link for that. So we have state and local implementation calls where we discuss actually programs all across the United States, what best practices are coming out of those programs, what people, you know, should be focusing on in terms of when they're implementing their own programs. And then we're also going to be talking about that $350 billion in state resources that are coming out and what folks can do with that money. We actually had a really long conversation on our last call about that and trying to prioritize that money for housing. So sorry, I'm just looking for the link that I have. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in getting on those calls. They're open to everybody. So, and again, a really good opportunity to share what's happening in your own state in Delaware here and what's working and what's not working and trying to learn from that.
Great, thank you, Tori. We are going to say goodbye and thank you to Tori and move on to our next speaker who is with us today. If folks have additional questions, Tori, are you going to be hanging out for a little bit? Can you address questions maybe in the chat? And
I will,
for a few minutes.
For sure.
Great, thank you. So if folks have any additional questions or things they'd like to communicate with Tori, please go ahead and communicate with her in the chat. That would be great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Our next speaker today, I'm very pleased to welcome Director Anas Bonati. I'm the director of our Delaware State Housing Authority. Director Bonati was first nominated by Governor Jack Markell to his position and confirmed by the Delaware Senate in 2009. The Delaware State Housing Authority is Delaware's housing finance agency, as well as a housing authority that does operate some public housing and administers some, though by no means all, of Delaware's housing voucher programs. Under his leadership, DSHA has become one of the few housing authorities in the country that administers a state-funded housing voucher program, the State Rental Assistance Program, which I think many folks here in Delaware know as SRAP. And I think as for many of us here at Housing Alliance, we work in many different ways with many different folks at the Delaware State Housing Authority, as I'm sure many of you do. This year has been a particularly busy year, I think, for the DSHA team. They've been working hard to develop, launch, and implement emergency rental assistance programs since I think April or May of 2020. They are currently administering that emergency rental assistance on behalf of Delaware. And this assistance has provided emergency relief to thousands of Delaware's low and moderate income households through both rental and mortgage help. So Director Bonati is here to speak with us today about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the housing landscape here in Delaware. So thank you, Director Anas, for your leadership and for being with us here today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. I don't know if you are planning to share your screen.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Let me just do that.
Welcome.
First. Not that one.
While Anas works to share his screen, I will just let folks know who may not have joined us at prior Day for Housing events. I cannot wait to be back with you all, where we can be sharing food, eating meals, and coming together in person. So we really appreciate your patience with us this year as we try to bring this event to you virtually.
I think it's, can you see my screen or?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Let me just try this again here. This is the problem of having two monitors. There you go.
We are seeing your Zoom screen. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Got it.
Let me stop this. Nope. There you go. Well, good morning, and thank you for the kind introduction. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Anas Bonati. I'm the director of Delaware State Housing Authority. I want to thank all the partners who are connected today. I see some familiar faces and familiar names. So I thank you for your past and continued support to the agency and to the work we do and to our clients, especially in the current circumstances. I want to thank DSHA staff, specifically Marlena Gibson and Jessica Eisenberry, who helped me with this presentation and compile some data for this presentation. So I was asked to speak to the impact of COVID-19 from a housing perspective and also the DSHA response to some of the challenges. In addressing the impact, I will focus mainly on the rental and the homeownership, just because it's the data that's available to us and trying to quantify a little bit that impact. And as a disclaimer, I do not want to minimize or ignore the impact on specifically our special populations. So when you talk about homelessness, persons with disability, victims of domestic violence and so forth, I know the impact is much greater. It's just that I don't have the data to quantify it. I'm sure there are sources nationally that we can cite, and there are cases that you all have seen here in Delaware. So I just want to put the disclaimer out there. So when you look at the impact, and specifically for why it's not moving, there we go. Specifically for affordable housing, this is just a good reminder, and I know the Housing Coalition before that and the Housing Alliance now does a good job comparing and looking at the median rents and the median income and showing the gap on annual basis. But this is just a reminder here in Delaware from the needs assessment that we have about 40,000 families who are very low income, making 50% or less than the area median income. We have about 30,000 of those who are cost burdened. That means they are paying more than 30% of their income, gross income, toward rental expense or housing expenses in general. And then if you dig a little deeper, we have 23,000 who are extremely low income, meaning less than 30% AMI, and about 16,000 households are cost burden, meaning more than 30%. So they are making less than 30% AMI, paying more than 30% of that toward housing expenses. And about close to 14,000 are severely cost burden, meaning they are paying more than 50% of their gross income toward housing expenses. So all this to say that we had a fragile situation to start with before COVID. When you look at the rental impacts, and we try to base it here on some data, on the rental side is hard to quantify compared to the mortgage side or homeownership side, because the mortgage delinquencies and mortgage performance is tracked and has been tracked for many years, both nationally and locally. And there are many sources to either get free data or go a little deeper in terms of demographic and buy data as well. On the rental side, it's not something that's ongoing. There is not a data bank or repository that's collecting that information. So we tend to rely on surveys that are done on as needed basis. So the survey here that was done by the census shows that just in Delaware, there are about 13,000 renter households reported not being current on their rent. They are a combination of the ones that were surveyed between April 28th and May 10th. There is about 13% who have either no confidence or slight confidence in paying their rents. So when you look at the percentage, you tend to probably say, okay, it's just 13%. But when you look at the numbers, those are 15,000 households in our states who are either non-confident or have slight confidence in being able to pay their rental expense. When you dig deeper, and because Delaware is such a small sample, and in this survey, we didn't think it will be really reflective of the reality to just look at the data for Delaware. So we stepped out, zoomed out, and looked at how is it impacting renters in general in the country. And we can try to make our own conclusions for how it is impacting it here locally. But you can see that minorities are hit the hardest. So out of 15% who are being impacted with rental challenges, it is not across the board proportional when it comes to races. So when you look at Asian, Black, Latino, you can see that we are in the 20-some% versus the 9% for white non-Latino, which gives us a median or average of the 15%. So not everything is equal across the different ethnicity and races. On the mortgage side, again, the data is much more robust. There is a good trend here where you can look at what's happening before and after. We can also compare to the last crisis, the financial crisis of 07, 09 to 2010 or so. So what you can see there in that graph is total delinquency. So that's everything that's 30 days plus all the way up to pre-foreclosure. And you can see that spike that happened in 2020 going into the last quarter of first quarter 20 into last quarter 20, meaning last year. And just a reminder for us here in Delaware, I think the first state of emergency was put in place in March, and it hit hardest at first hospitality businesses and service businesses, but then we had a few months where it was hitting most of our businesses here in the States and employers and employees. So you can see that we're trending at about the same trend as the US average when it comes to total delinquency here, and this is from the Mortgage Bankers Association. This slide here is very interesting because it shows that most of our delinquency, and it's the same case for the US, but most of our delinquencies are coming from the 90+ days. So you can see that light blue, I guess, or bluish turquoise color in the bottom, which is the 30 days. You also see the purple one, which is the 60 days. And then you have the brownish color, the 90 days, where you can see from that Q1 20 into the end of 20, that portion is the one that has grown the largest among all categories of delinquencies. The one disclaimer here is that this data does not reflect forbearance agreements and some of the agreements that were offered by servicers. I have seen some data. It's really not widely available, but there are some set of data that dig in a little deeper to see out of these mortgages, which ones have offered protections to some of the homeowners. And this next slide shows you some of that, because when you look at government loans versus private conventional loans, meaning anything that's being secured by FHA, VA, RD versus your conventional loans, which tend to be Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and private label securities in some cases, you can see that seriously delinquent for the conventional loans is much lower than the seriously delinquent. The total past due is also much lower. You're talking at 4% versus 15, almost 15% for past due conventional versus FHA, and 3.3% versus 11 or 12% almost for seriously delinquent conventional versus FHA. And this is just in Delaware. So our hope is that there were some forbearance agreements that were presented that offered some protection, and some of these homeowners have some kind of protection and hopefully work out in plan. But we should not just take that assumptions for granted, because we have seen what happened in the last crisis, where it didn't start early, but the wave or tsunami was building up, and we felt it even 2 years after the start of the crisis. So now going to the response or resources, and I want to put that in two different categories. And again, these are not, we try to be comprehensive, but these are not all the housing funds and resources that have come to the state. Some of them have come through different agencies. Some of them came directly to some of the nonprofit. So I don't want to present this as the most comprehensive, but it captures most or the big ticket items that we usually see as a response, especially from the federal government. So when you look at the resources or bucket of resources that DSHA and some of our partners have received, they came mainly from two resources. The first one is HUD, Housing and Urban Development Federal Department, and the second one is the US Treasury. So when you look at HUD, it was mainly an increase of some of the ongoing programs. So we saw an increase on CDBG, ESG, HAPWA from the first CARES Act, and then through the American Rescue Plan, we saw a nice increase on home and the creation of what they call the emergency housing vouchers. You can see there that agencies that are administering that is not just the SHA, but really our local government as well. So in some instances, you have the City of Wilmington and Newcastle County. Other instances, you have some of the housing authorities as well. What we have done through Marlena Gibson team and Cindy DeKine's team is work in conjunction with some of the other recipients. So we are not offering a service or a program that's valid just in one geographic location versus the other. Because one thing that I don't want to see is because we had different recipient, we have constituents who are calling and they're being offered the service in Dover while they cannot get it in Seaford or Wilmington or Newark. So some of the things that we have funded with mainly the HUD funds and some of the CARES Act funding is working with homeless shelters. Mainly for us was Kent and Sussex, while we worked with Newcastle County government and the city of Wilmington for their portion for Newcastle County mainly. We had an existing relation with rapid rehousing providers to help homeless families displaced in hotels to return to permanent housing. So it was a blessing that we created a partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh and a couple other funders that was called Home for Good. And we already had agreements in place with different nonprofits to help with rapid rehousing. And that's something that we hear a lot, that in addition to shelter capacity, if we can just turn over some of that capacity and get people back to permanent housing, that will help us free up the shelter capacity. So we had some contracts and agreements that we were able to quickly deploy resource by amending some of those agreements. We worked with health social services, especially the state service, Renee Beenham and her team, to add some few $1 million to their rental vouchers for hotels for homeless Delawareans. We worked again through existing contracts to offer legal services through some of our nonprofit legal service organization to households who were facing eviction, and offer emergency homeless prevention assistance as well to keep people on their house and avoid homelessness to start with. In terms of resources from the Treasury, which I believe they have, it's a double-edged sword. So they are more generous, a little bit more flexible in terms of usage for those programs, but it required of us the creation of new programs that we did not have. So it required a lot of capacity building, and in some instances, a trial and error to see how we can get the programs up and running. Just in summary here, the first one that we received specifically coming to us, not to the states, through the state government to us, but specifically and directly to DSHA. It was the first CARES Act that was signed back then by President Trump in early December, which offered $200 million of rental assistance and utility assistance and housing stability services to DSHA. The deadline was extended, so now it's September 30th to 2022, which I think was December or October 2021, which really didn't give us much time. The second one, it was the American Rescue Plan, which was signed by President Biden, which offered Delaware an additional $152 million for housing, rental and housing stability. And that comes with a deadline of September 30th, 2025. The other bucket that came with this one, with the American Rescue Plan, is a $50 million with the same deadline, September 30th, 2025. And it's specifically for mortgage and utility assistance and housing stability. So when I say flexibility, it is flexibility within these buckets, but it's not a flexibility in terms of getting outside of this bucket. So they give us some freedom to design the program, but it has to be for these certain activities. So we cannot take rental assistance and go pay off somebody's mortgage, or build a tax credit site with, or use it to support operations unless it's associated with the delivery of these different services. The first one I want to touch on is the rental assistance, and I'm really proud of what Delaware has done here, not with DSHA, but we rallied all the 3 counties to participate with us. We were able to get nonprofit to help us take applications. And kudos to the team here with Marlena Gibson and Jessica again and Brian Rossello and others who got really a program up and running within 2 weeks of the state of emergency back in March 2022. So this program started with a PDF fillable. It was very basic. It was, I think we started with $1,500. It went up to $2,000. We were able to raise, I believe, about $6 million from the different partners, in addition to Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. We had challenges, but we were the first state to offer a rental response. And our objective was really to build that bridge between the shutdown due to the state of emergency and having the federal funding start trickling down either to us or directly to Delawareans, because there was a gap. There was at least a 4-week gap, and we knew that as you saw, folks were already struggling with paying the housing expenses, and we needed to put that bridge or band-aid in place. The second version came when we were able to secure CARES Act through the states that came to us. So we increased that rental assistance to about 8,000, and we were able to help an additional 3,000 households. And we ran that program from August to December, and we had to put it on hold because of the funding restriction and because we were still digesting the guidance from Treasury and Congress on the next pot of money. And that took us to DHAP 3.0, the Delaware Housing Assistance Program. So that was relaunched end of March. It's much more generous. It doesn't have a rental cap in terms of dollars assistance, but it does provide up to 15 months in a rental assistance, back rent, and 3 months into the future. And it comes with a $200 million in federal funding for rental assistance. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in terms of where we are with the numbers. So just between DHAP 1.0 and 2.0 that we launched in 2020, we were able to deploy $15 million, assist about 4,201 households to be exact, and disperse those funding and literally close those books just a month or so ago. With the new funding that's coming through Treasury, so we had a good start. We had a huge demand. However, because we moved to new software, and I think some of you probably have heard some of that feedback, to make it a little bit more user-friendly, we had some challenges, technology challenges on the back end for disbursements. So we just resolved those challenges, I think about 2-3 weeks ago. So we have a backlog of approved waiting payments, agencies and landlords that we are trying to work through. I know it has created some frustration out there because I understand it's not right that you applied 6 weeks ago and you still have not seen a payment. We are keeping in touch with the court system in terms of evictions. I know they have put in place some protections in terms of dispute resolutions and directing folks, both tenants and landlords, to DHAP. So since just the relaunch of the DHAP and just this latest version in March, we were able to receive 5,400 applications for about 26.6 million. And I believe payments are being made this week. I think we're up to a couple $1 million worth of payments, but we feel like that we're going to get caught up quite nicely in the next week or two. So just to speed up this and leave a couple minutes at least for questions, this is the website that we launched that has a more comprehensive response to the assistance. On the mortgage, on the outreach, these are some of the things that we have been putting out there. So we have worked with different groups. We are trying to get to faith groups to get the information out there. We have translated to Spanish. We're working with the Creole Haitian community on Creole as well, especially in some pockets. And we're trying to get the word out there. And I think we have done a decent job at it. And once we get caught up in the payments, we're going to beef up a little bit those outreach efforts. On the mortgage side, you have probably heard me talk about this. When we launched DMAP, only 2,321 household helped. We think the low number is due to the forbearance. People didn't feel like there was pressure to pay, so they didn't apply. We are planning to relaunch this maybe end June, beginning July with the new $50 million that we got. And we are also planning to launch, which I think it will be a game changer, utility assistance. We're working with different utility organizations from Delmarva all the way down to the municipal small ones to create agreements to pay for utility, mainly gas, electric, and water sewer utilities. This is the next for mortgage assistance. I think I talk about that. So I will stop here and turn it back to either Rachel or Sarah. I don't know if you have time for a couple minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anas. We are so appreciative of you being here and all the work that your team's doing to get this help to people in our communities. I have a question. I've been monitoring the chat. I'm going to ask a question that I kind of have for you. If folks have questions, please go ahead. Some of them have been answered in the chat already, but if folks have other questions for Anas, now's the time to go ahead and put those in the chat. Anas, when you think about, so some of what we're hearing, and it's anecdotal, and I was wondering if you knew any more than we do about what we're seeing in terms of increased rental costs or increased costs for home purchases in the state, given the state of the housing sector. Are there any trends that we're seeing, and maybe we don't have the data yet, and that's a fine answer, about increases in the fair market rent, increases in the market rate rental units in the state due to some of the crunch on the rental market?
Yes, so I think it's the perfect storm, not in a good way, because on one hand, both construction, especially vertical, non-horizontal, is seeing high cost on materials, labor shortage, and so forth. So that's creating a big dent on supply. Generally speaking, we're experiencing that with some of our projects. I think I shared that with you on the low-income housing tax credit. We are trying to secure some funding to fill the gap there. And we are also seeing it on the homeownership side, just from talking to our partners, realtors and builders. I know that the eviction protections do help, but they don't eliminate the risk when your lease is up. And I think a couple legislators are looking at that, and maybe they can speak to it, but they're worried that the lease choice of lease termination might allow the landlord to increase the rent and take advantage, which I don't blame them. I mean, it's a free market to a certain degree, but will end up harming some of our families who were experiencing a lower rent. So I don't think, I mean, for us, there is flexibility to assist, but it's not going to be a legislative matter for us. It's more a programmatic matter. So we are looking at how we can keep people in place with the rental side. On the mortgage side, also, we are looking at, can we use some of this funding for down payment assistance down the road for some of these severely hurt communities, impacted communities? Can we also, instead of just putting a Band-Aid, can we rewrite that loan with some of these resources so the person is set for the long run and be having a mortgage that's more affordable, not just closing on that gap?
Thank you. And we have time, I think, for one more question from Anne Aviles in the chat. How are people returning home from prison being included in plans or support for access to affordable housing and public housing? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, so DSHA, we have been part with corrections and others in a reentry commission. And one of the things that happened before that reentry commission is through work of Marlena teams and Chris Whaley, we developed a matrix that we call our criminal background matrix. So we went from, and I think most of the housing authorities are using it here in Delaware. So we went from a straight 5 years ban, which was, by the way, a model of best practice from the federal government, to now looking at a different matrix and engaging probation officers and having a matrix that really varies depending on the severity of the crime, not punishing everyone at the same level. The second thing that's just happened recently, and I want to get the word out so people are taking advantage of, is the family reunification. So we are literally the only state where all the housing authorities have signed agreements with us and with corrections, where if you have someone in the public housing already, and there is a person who is being released, and they can prove through their probation officer to the housing authority that there is a relation, it has to be a direct relationship, that they can come to them and stay with them for up to 2 years as a guest. So it's a guest policy. Usually, I think the guest policy is 60 to 90 days. This one has been extended. And what it does, it doesn't bring, for the family, it doesn't put them at risk because they are a guest. It doesn't add the income to the calculation. And if something goes wrong, they will not be in lease violation, which in most cases, they will bring them on and they end up being evicted, all of them. For us, the housing authority, because sometimes things go wrong, it gives us the ability to stop that guest agreement at any time because they're not part of the lease and there is more flexibility. So I feel like it's a win-win solution for us to work with the ex-offender, the housing authority, and probation and parole to make sure that this is successful. We're gonna have cases that will go wrong. We gotta just own up to it and not throw anybody under the bus.
Thank you so much for answering our questions and being with us today. We at Housing Alliance, and I think I can speak for many of our partners here, are very glad to have your team working with us each day in our communities. So thank you for everything that you do.
Well, thank you to your team. Thank you to all the partners here. It's it feels like a reunion. So I'm glad that we are all together. I know this is a very important day, and I feel like it's really the coming together of all the housing partners in the states and highlighting this, which should be an issue for every day in the year, not just one day. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Anas. That is a great point. We come together this one day a year, but we all know it's not a one day a year problem, and there's not going to be a one day a year solution. So thank you all for what you're doing every day. I am going to ask everyone, and I might make a fool of myself here, but I'm going to ask everyone to stand up, shimmy, 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 take a moment. We're going to take a few minutes, go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, take a break, and in about 3 minutes, come back to your seat and we're going to get started with our breakout sessions.
All right, everyone, that was your 30-second break to stand and shimmy. I really appreciate everyone sticking with us. We have a lot of content to get through today, and it's all so important. I did put in the chat that you can continue to put questions in the chat. You can let me know if they're directed to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, to Delaware State Housing Authority, or to other speakers. If your questions are not answered by the speakers, we'll try and make sure that they're answered throughout the day, or I'm happy to follow up with you after today. As Anas said, Day for Housing continues, right? We're not just here for one day. We have a really exciting next 27 minutes ahead of you. Well, I guess at this point it's 23. So we wanted to make sure that we created a space today to do a little bit of engagement around housing advocacy, what's happening in our state, how can we all engage? So what is going to happen, the technical piece of what's going to happen is the little gremlins inside the computer are going to push us all into breakout rooms. We will be in breakout rooms. Each room will have a facilitator that was previously assigned, and those rooms will be a place for us to discuss what's happening in Delaware or on the national level, to raise some issues and questions, to connect with our community. So I hope that you all put your videos on and see everyone's smiling faces. And we are going to engage around the materials that we sent out prior to this meeting. So I just dropped them in the chat, but we have sent out some policy pages, just kind of a really brief kind of summary of some of the highlights of what's happening in our state legislature, and also kind of an advocacy toolkit to kind of answer some basic questions about what is advocacy and how can we engage in advocacy. The next 20 minutes or so are really important because I think it's going to give us a time to think collectively as a group about what questions we want to ask Senator Pinckney and Representative Johnson. So I will be doing an introduction of them before they speak, but I just want to lay it out for you so you're clear. They'll each be talking for half an hour. Senator Pinckney is going to talk about generally homelessness and issues surrounding homelessness in Delaware. Senator Johnson's going to talk generally around affordable housing. They will both be speaking a little bit, and then we will have time to engage with them and ask questions. So in your breakout room, I want you to think strategically about kind of what questions we want to make sure we bring to the table and that we raise up to make sure that we get our important things in front of the legislators that we've invited today. Like Rachel said earlier, we're sad that we're not seeing everyone in person and eating bagels and marching over to Legislative Hall. But our marching over physically to Legislative Hall, we've replaced with this kind of engagement with two really important legislators, one from the Senate and one from the House, who are working on housing issues. So think of this as your marching time. And so we're gathering in groups to prepare for that. So what Felicia is going to do again is that she's going to hit a special button. We are all going to seamlessly appear in smaller breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, you will not be recorded. So you may want to have someone taking notes or thinking about how to communicate what happened in the breakout room when you go into your next session. After the breakout rooms are over, you will see a 60-second, your breakout room is going to end at the top of your screen. Don't push any buttons at that point. You will automatically be pushed back into the general session to hear Senator Pinckney when she speaks at 11 o'clock. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes or so to do our breakout rooms. And I'm going to ask Felicia to go ahead and hit the magical button when you're ready. It may take a minute for everybody to go through the wires and end up in your breakout rooms. Don't panic. If you do have a problem, put something in the chat and we're happy to help you, or reach out to us through email or some other method. Felicia is our amazing, shout out to Felicia, our amazing HAD staff member who has figured out how to make all of this magically happen. So she will be behind the scenes, pushing people around, making sure that they end up in the right place. Thanks, Felicia. Whenever you're ready.
All rooms should be open at this point, and you should be heading to your breakout room. Ursula, can you hear us? Are you having difficulty getting to a breakout room?
In the state of Delaware. that was interesting to me, the cost of living. And when you try to reach out to look for housing or rental or refer someone to rental, the, the rents are pretty much out um, of the affordability range for most people that are in need of housing.
Yeah, that's a really big discussion to happen in
Yeah.
15 minutes. Good job.
Yeah, it was deep. It got deep, yes.
Yeah. Anyone else want to report out from their group?
Yes, Sarah, this is Councilman Fred Neal. My remarks are probably more apt to other areas than the homeless. But I'm basically something that I've already sent to you, encouraging a public service commission to allow a profit for these apartment houses that have been built with public money, but at the same time, basically control the costs. So it'll be less expensive, less pressure on the minimum wage. It's all going to go out to investors unless we fix this problem. And I think if we have to think outside the box, as well as how much money we're going to get from where to do what. Because as long as you're going to let investors take advantage of the Delaware economy by taking millions and millions and millions of dollars out and don't do anything about to fix the laws, or basically have a service commission which will allow them to make a profit, but at the same time take a look at what it actually costs to provide the housing, then I think we're in trouble. And I'm still waiting for answers from Karen Speakman and from you on what the idea that I sent, which starts with Congress, taking the money from Freddie Mac, from Fannie Mae, and from HUD, and saying, okay, this is what you can charge, but when it's over and done with, and you're selling this for profit, it has to go either to the people who are living there or to an organization such as Diamond Trust or Milford Housing to basically control what those costs are. Now, other than that, we're still going to be in trouble. It's not just throwing money that is going to go into investors' pocket at the end of when the money runs out.
Well,
I'm signing off.
thank you, Councilman Neal. I always appreciate your perspective and love having you in the room. It's really important that you're here. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Senator Pinckney. She is here to give a presentation and speak with us today. She's a first-term senator. She represents the 13th district. And for those of us who need our districts defined for us, which I do, that's Wilmington to Bear. She serves on the Senate Housing Committee. And so we're so excited to have her here to talk to us about housing. But she also has a background that lends itself to a deep understanding of the work that we all do. She works as a social worker. She provides case management and trauma-informed care to individuals in the healthcare system. And part of her job is to provide discharge planning services and emotional support for parents and families. And we all know that many of the folks that we serve also see Senator Pinckney for her services. She's a social worker. She's a foster mother. She's a state senator. She's dedicated her life to advocacy. And we've invited her here today to talk to us about the issues of homelessness facing our state and how we can do our best advocacy to support her and make sure that we're addressing the issues that we see every day and hopefully that we discussed in our breakout rooms. So Senator Pinckney, whenever you're ready, you should have the capacity to share your screen if you want to. Again, for those of us who maybe are tech unsavvy, if you can't see Senator Pinckney while she's talking, you can change your screen to speaker view so that you can see her. All right, thank you so much, Senator Pinckney.
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be with you all here. Hoping you can see my screen okay. Okay, good.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Sarah. I don't really think I need to say any more than that, but I am Senator Pinckney and very excited to talk with you all this morning. I'm going to apologize now if I continue to turn around and seem a little distracted. I made the random decision to get a kitten and she is bouncing all around this room. So if you see me turning around every few minutes, I'm trying to make sure she's not anywhere she's not supposed to be. But I am here to talk with you all about homelessness in Delaware. And it is a big issue. I don't think we give enough attention to the experience of homelessness in Delaware. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to highlight the experience of homelessness throughout our state. I would really love to be able to save as much time as possible for questions. So if I'm going to go through my kind of informational piece rather quickly, and then if there are any questions, I'm happy to have this be as conversational as possible towards the latter part of my half an hour with you guys this morning. So the first thing I have to do is give an amazing shout out to Delaware Continuum of Care, who is the organization where a lot of this information came from. So one of the things that the Continuum of Care does every January is a point in time count of homelessness throughout the state of Delaware. So through the last 10 days of the month of January, they do a compilation of who is homeless throughout our state towards the end of the month in January, and they help us get some numbers to see what is going on as far as the experience of homelessness throughout Delaware. So this chart really speaks to that, and I thought that it was interesting to see that from 2018 to 2019, we were somewhat on the decline in terms of who was experiencing homelessness at that given period of time throughout our state. But then when you look back in the beginning of 2020, you see that number come right back up again and actually exceed where it was in 2018. And keep in mind that this was in January. So that means that this was before the pandemic really took hold in Delaware, and before we could get a kind of point in time picture of what homelessness looked like at the height of the pandemic throughout our state. And one of the things that you can also see is the breakdown by county. So you can see where throughout the state are some of the higher numbers of homelessness. So you see over 50% up in Newcastle County, and then the numbers start to get a little bit lower in Kent and Sussex County, but that's also keeping in mind that Newcastle County is our most populous part of the state. So those numbers are kind of to be expected in terms of the breakdown of who actually lives in our state and what parts of our state people live in. One of the things that we know is that any given night in Delaware, there are over 1,000 people that are experiencing homelessness in our state, with a quarter of those people being under the age of 18. And that also, you have to bear in mind that this is a state with just over 970,000 people. So of that 970,000 total people in our state, on any given night, 1,000 of them are experiencing homelessness, and over 3,000 people throughout the year experiencing homelessness. So it's a very prevalent issue within our state. And, fortunately, we do have some good resources in the state, but when you think about 1,000 people, I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of getting support for those people and getting them off the streets as much as possible. So this chart kind of talks about some of the different variables of who actually is experiencing homelessness. And one of the things that I want to point out is that, like most of the social determinants of health throughout this country, Black Delawareans are experiencing disproportionate rates of homelessness, in particular Black men. So you can see the breakdown of about 60% of the people who are experiencing homelessness are men, and then about 50% of them are Black individuals. So we see, like in so many other areas, that Black people are disproportionately affected by just one of many social determinants of health that we experience. I also thought it was interesting to take a look at the age range. So you see the biggest part of the pie is age 24 and older. So that is such a huge variable of people that are experiencing homelessness, and truly disheartening. And also a decent amount, around 6% are, around 23% are teenagers that are experiencing homelessness. And just thinking about that burden on the mental space of an adolescent who is likely still going to school, and then knowing that they don't really have a place to go home to once that end of the day bell rings. And also, because I'm a social worker, then that sends me down a rabbit hole of other things to think about, of how that impacts their school performance, the likelihood that they become victims of bullying, and other forms of trauma that result from not having a stable place to sleep at night. sorry. The next slide here talks about some of the intersections of the experience of homelessness. So I won't spend a whole bunch of time here, but I just thought that it was interesting to take into consideration that very often when a person experiences homelessness, that's just one of the many different intersections of what they're experiencing. So many of them are experiencing mental health concerns that go untreated. Many of them are experiencing substance use disorders. Many of them suffer from or have been diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Many of them are victims of domestic violence, and these are all things that either make you more likely to experience homelessness or are likely to be coupled with the experience of homelessness. So when we think about homelessness, we also have to think about all of the many different facets of a person's life that are also impacted and sometimes to an even greater detriment when a person experiences homelessness, and making sure that we're providing services to them that address these issues as well. When we start to talk about how we find housing and supportive housing for individuals who experience homelessness. And because I am a legislator and because I am a social worker, I don't want to leave on just like a negative note. I always want to talk about, especially since that's kind of our purpose here today is advocacy. I want to talk about what we can do about the issue. It's not enough for us to just pull data and look at numbers. We really have to focus on what we can do about the problem. Fortunately for Delaware, like I mentioned, we have some amazing organizations that are already doing great work, but there is still more that can be done. And one of the things that I think is always important is that we don't just look at legislative fixes, although they are a huge part of the puzzle. We also need to talk about putting our money where our mouth is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So starting on more of a macro level, when the program first started this morning, we heard from someone on the national level talking about all of the work that is already being done on a federal level. And one of the things that we can do, and one of my favorite things about Delaware, is that we have really easy access to our legislators from a local level all the way up to federal. And so we have the opportunity to reach out to them to let them know that we need the support of the American Jobs Plan. I'm so excited about that infrastructure bill and what it's going to do for our country and what we have the opportunity to do with it if we get the funding that the Biden administration is pushing for. And so we need to make sure that our federal delegation continues to push for it as well. And even broader than that, if you know people in some of the more in some of the states that are kind of holding out and not necessarily looking to support it, reach out to those people, because those are the states that we really need to get on board with getting the American Jobs Plan passed. There are some, like was mentioned earlier, there are states that are holding out. There are states that there are Congress individuals who do not view housing as infrastructure, which blows my mind. But if we can get them on board, we can really get the federal dollars to do the state work that needs to get done. And then with that, I'll move from a macro level down to a meso level in terms of what we can do on a state level and what is already being done. Sarah mentioned that I am the co-chair of the newly formed housing committee in the Senate. It's the first year that the Senate has ever had a housing committee, and we're already doing really great work. From Senator Lockman's Senate Bill 90, which is a source of income protection bill. So what it says is that a person cannot be discriminated against in terms of access to housing because of the type of income that they use to purchase that housing. I'm thinking specifically of like Section 8 vouchers and things of that nature. You cannot say to a person that you don't want to accept their Section 8 voucher in terms of accepting housing. Some of the things that we've heard from in terms of opposition to that bill, though, and things that still need to get worked on, include the fact that sometimes utilizing the Section 8 voucher isn't the easiest system to navigate for landlords. So that is something that we're looking into too as a state, to say like, we absolutely need to support people who need housing, but we also need to support the people that provide the housing so that they continue to be friendly to the people who need the housing, and that we continue to have access to housing, because as was already mentioned, we have a significant shortage on housing in terms of affordable housing. So we're trying to look at how we support and hold landlords accountable at the same time. And with that, there is also Senate Bill 101 that is being led by Senator Brian Townsend. Senate Bill 101 is one that we heard a lot from the advocates about, and it's the right to counsel. So we already know that landlords, when they go through the eviction process, almost always have someone there to play as counsel, to act as counsel for them, but very often on the tenant side, individuals do not have anyone for counsel, be it because they can't afford it, because they don't know that the services are out there. So this bill will make it so that people have the right and the access to counsel when they're going through the eviction process. Another component of that bill is going to be providing Delaware with a minimum of arrears, because right now, a person can be evicted from their housing for $5. There's no minimum amount of what someone can, what can get the eviction process started when it comes to back rent. So the Senate Bill 101 introduces a $500 minimum of arrears to say that you cannot evict someone until they are either $500 behind or 1 month's rent behind on their rent as well. So very excited about those. And then one more bill that is currently being drafted and I am hoping to get introduced as soon as possible is the Bill of Rights for persons experiencing homelessness. And fortunately, Delaware is one of those states where we all know one another. So there are so many of the advocates who are helping me draft that legislation right here on this call. And we've worked very tirelessly all session to get that bill ready to go, and it's being drafted and should be introduced very soon. So I'm looking forward to that. And what that bill does is basically say that a person who does not have housing still has rights, and those rights cannot be infringed upon. So very much looking forward to getting that bill out there and passed. Something else that can be done on a state level, and it can be done right now actually, is contacting JFC and bond committee. So those are the senators and representatives who tell us where the money goes. One of my favorite quotes that most of us are familiar with is, you can tell a lot about a person or state by where they put their money and where they invest their money. So reach out to the individuals that are on JFC and on bond and let them know that we need to be thinking about homelessness as well, and how we support homelessness and how we put more finances to it. Delaware is in a really, really good state right now because of all of the federal dollars that have come our way. We have a really good surplus of money, and we need to make sure that we're providing that money to the places where it needs to be most. So when you're done here today, you can pop over and watch the JFC hearings and contact legislators via email and let them know that we need to support the experience of homelessness as well. And then moving down to a micro level of how we can do advocacy and do this work. As I mentioned, and will continue to mention, there are so many amazing nonprofits and advocates that are already doing this work. I'm thinking about Delaware Continuum of Care. I'm thinking about all of us here today, the Homes Campaign. And I also have to give my special shout out to the Hope Center, which is located in the 13th District. There are already so many amazing nonprofits and shelters throughout our state that you can lend your time to, that you can lend your personal finances to in terms of donations. So reach out to those organizations and think about how we can get involved with them as well. And then finally and lastly is thinking about intersectionality. And I mentioned this one mostly because I'm a social worker, but I mentioned earlier about all of the different pieces of a person's life that are coupled with their experience of homelessness. So there are certain communities that are at higher risk for experiencing homelessness, whether it's individuals in the LGBTQI plus community, whether it is individuals with mental health concerns, substance abuse concerns. And those are all issues that you can get involved in as well, that if people receive support in those areas, it can also decrease the likelihood that they may experience homelessness. So if you provide support to those type of communities as well, that has a positive impact on a person's ability to maintain housing. And one other piece that I forgot to mention on a state level is looking through laws that already exist that we may not even be familiar with. I also, alongside Senator Lockman, am the co-chair of Infrastructure and Environment, which is a subcommittee of the African American Task Force. I think you're going to be joined by my colleague, Representative Johnson, who is the chair of the co-chair of Health and Welfare and Infrastructure in the African American Task Force. But Senator Lockman and I do a lot of focus on housing in our Infrastructure and Environment subcommittee. And I mention that because we've been looking at what's going on in the state. And one of the things that we found is the idea of municipal crime-free housing, which currently exists actually in Dover. So municipal crime-free housing, and I'm going to pull it up so I make sure I explain it correctly. They're basically laws that encourage or provide the opportunity for landlords to evict tenants who have varying levels of interaction with law enforcement. So just because of their interactions with law enforcement, landlords or police officers have the opportunity to work with landlords and say who may or may not live in a certain community. And those are the type of laws that are not helpful. We know that the experience of homelessness is bolstered by, or I'm sorry, we know that experiences of crime and poverty are bolstered by the lack of access to adequate housing. And so if we are doing things that advance someone's access to homelessness, then we're also furthering the likelihood that someone may get involved in crime just to try to make ends meet for themselves. So those are laws that are not effective. Those are laws that we need to take a look at and think about how we change or repeal them. And policy has been being made for a very long time. So I have no doubt that there are other laws out there that communities have access to that are ineffective today, and that were probably ineffective when they were passed. So we have an opportunity to go back and kind of right some of those wrongs to ensure that we are doing things that are going to provide communities with support instead of with criminalization. So that in essence is also saying that I'm a legislator, I am not perfect, and that goes to say for all of the legislators before me, and we need to be held accountable for the laws that we pass too, and how they positively or negatively impact the people that we're passing those laws for. So if you see these kind of things going on, make sure that you're reaching out to your legislators, because again, Delaware, there's not even 6 degrees of separation from your legislator, I'm sure. So take advantage of that and hold us accountable to make sure that we're doing what's best for all of you and for people who may experience homelessness throughout our state as well. So I think I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Sarah, to see if there are any questions. I'm happy to get further dialogue with everyone.
Well, thank you for that amazing presentation. You have a lot of questions, but you also answered a lot of questions, I think, and brought up a lot of really good points that people were already discussing in the chat. So I think we can all see your passion for the issues and really appreciate that. So I'm gonna hit the big one first. So Dr. Deborah Gilbert-White put in the chat that many have lost income, many can't afford housing, many can't afford rising housing costs. We all know that housing is the solution to homelessness. We talked a lot in our breakout groups about kind of all of these affordable housing and access to housing issues. So can you tell us just big picture what you think the best policy would be, or what you can work on in the Senate to help make sure that everyone has access to housing, and how we can support you in that?
That is a really good question. And first I have to say hi to Dr. White. Hello, one of my favorite advocates that I get to work with. And that is a really good question. And I think there are a million different ways to answer that. I will kind of go to my first thought is that I think that's one where we even need to look a little bit further than policy. And it just brings me back to the idea of we need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to increase funding for affordable housing. We need to incentivize developers to create affordable housing. Because one of the things that we know for sure is that the developing is being done. The houses are being built. They're just not affordable. I think very often about my grandmother's house. My grandmother we still own my grandmother's house out in Newark. And I don't know exactly how much she purchased her house for, but she purchased it a while ago, and the homes in that neighborhood are older, so I can't imagine they're anything over $150,000. And just in the area behind them, though, which is going to drastically change that $150,000 quote, is there's this huge field behind her that our carnivals and circus used to use that area every summer. But developers recently accessed that housing and are building homes that are they're starting at, for the townhouses, are starting at $200,000. And for the single family homes are all the way up to $500,000. And so when I think about that, like I'm thinking about who are we providing housing to, and it's not to say that that category of people don't deserve housing as well, but I think we need to make sure that we're incentivizing for developers to be thinking about the people who can't afford $200,000 homes, and finding ways to get creative around that, and attracting the kind of communities, developers who are going to create like mixed income housing, low income housing, affordable housing, and find ways to address zoning and things of that nature that encourage lower income and affordable income housing to be created. So I don't have a specific policy for you, Dr. White. To me, the answer really is putting our money where our mouth is and encouraging the private sector to do the right thing, for us to make sure that we have the availability to housing. And also on top of that, because home ownership isn't for everybody. I know a lot of people who are just completely uninterested in home ownership. So we need to make sure that we are doing the things for landlords that are going to hold them accountable first and foremost, but also create opportunities for them to provide more housing as well, because there again are people who just would prefer to rent, and we need to make sure that there's opportunity for them to do that as well.
That was a great answer to my very complex question. I'm going to do it to you again, though. I apologize. So I'm kind of asking you compound questions, and
Okay.
So we've had a lot in the chat about kind of two separate things that I see as similar, and I'd like you to kind of talk to both. So one is that we see a rise in homelessness, particularly homeless families across the entire state in the past year. And there's a lot of people in the chat talking about kind of what can we be doing statewide, and specifically Kent and Sussex County, to address the issues of homelessness. That we know that you're the co-chair of the Senate Housing Committee. We know that you're working with two downstate legislators on that committee. Is there advocacy that we can bring? Is there something that we could be doing, kind of thinking statewide about how to address kind of the statewide issue of this increase in homelessness, particularly among families?
That's a really good question. And I absolutely appreciate bringing Kent Sussex into the conversation, because I think so often they get left out of the conversation. I'm going to come back to the idea again of funding, though. We have a really great surplus of federal dollars right now. And we can, we're erring on the side of caution with starting new programs because the money is not necessarily sustainable. So we won't have this surplus of money next year, because prayerfully, we will be out of the pandemic and we won't need the surplus of money in that form. I think there will, of course, be residuals of the pandemic that we'll still need to deal with, but there is a likelihood that we won't have the continuous surge of federal dollars coming to us. But as I mentioned earlier, we already have really, really great programs throughout our state that provide support for a lot of the experiences of homelessness. So if we can make sure that we are providing support for the communities and the organizations and nonprofits that are already doing the work, if we can continue to provide rental assistance, if we continue to pass legislation like Senate Bill 90 and Senate Bill 75 that require people to be advocated for in court so that we can stop homelessness before it even happens. I think that is an amazing place to, I won't say start because the work is being done, but continue to build upon. one of the things that advocates tell us all the time is that, and we have the data to prove, is that it's a lot easier and cheaper to keep someone in their home than it is to find housing for them and start the process all over. So if we can do everything possible to stop homelessness in its tracks, if we can find people when their electric bills are skyrocketed and they can't afford to pay them, if we can find people when transportation becomes problematic and it may cause them their job and then they can't pay their rent, we can stop homelessness in its tracks. So I think if we put more services in place in some of the other facets that in the long run affect a person's ability to have housing, I think that's exactly where we need to be. And that's not to say that we don't continue to support the organizations that do the work for homelessness, but we can also ease the burden on them if we stop the flow of people that are coming into them so they can focus on the people that they already have.
You answer my questions with such elegance. Thank you. So I think we have time for one more, and I'm going to ask another compound question. Sorry. So we know that housing is called a social determinant of health or a vital condition. We all understand, again, that housing is the solution to homelessness. We know that DHSS has a lot of areas for improvement. We also know that social workers like you statewide are overworked. They have high caseloads, and that can result in poor service to people, including people experiencing homelessness. So kind of keeping all of that in mind, what ideas do you have about improving resources that go to kind of this intersection of health and housing, or how do we as housing advocates coalesce around that intersection to help you kind of think about policy solutions?
Ooh, that is a really good compound question. So I think that we have to, I'm thinking about the American Jobs Plan, right? And how there are so many people that are saying like housing is an infrastructure, or food security is not infrastructure. And I think if we can get past that roads and trains are infrastructure, and we can broaden our scope of what leads to homelessness, I think that's exactly how we answer that question on a more macro level. So I'm thinking about, you talked about the ideas that social workers are often overburdened. We have caseloads that are unmanageable, and if you've been on probably just one call with me, you've heard me say in the past that I have $108,000 worth of student loan debt. And there was a time when I was making $17 an hour with a master's degree and $108,000 worth of student loan debt. So if we can ease the burden of the people who are doing the work so that they come to work invigorated and they feel compelled to and are mentally capable of being engaged in the work that they're doing, that's one avenue of that. If we can find out continue to know who is doing the work and prop those organizations up, that is one way of doing that. I think that there's sometimes this misconception that we need to start new organizations, or we need to start new groups when there are so many that are already doing the work. If we can support the ones that are already doing the work, I think that is how we address that as well. So I mentioned that JSC and bond is going on right now. How many of us have wrote emails and messages to the members of those committee and told them to put some money into the Hope Center, or put some money into the Continuum of Care, and to all of the different nonprofits that are going on. I think we have a really unique opportunity right now with all of the surplus of federal dollars that we have to bolster the groups and community organizations that are already doing the work and make sure that they're sustainable. I hope that answered your question.
It was a great answer. And I think everyone on this call can agree that we could all use more capacity and resources to meet the crushing needs that we see every day. And I know that you've experienced that. So we also have some great conversation going on in the chat. If you're able to stay, Senator Pinckney, we'd love to have you stay. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce Representative Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Sarah. And I have to commend you on your ability to stick to your timeline. You're very good at it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm a punctual person. So Representative Johnson is joining us today, and we're so thankful to have her here to continue the conversation. Again, we've asked her to come to talk to us specifically kind of around the issues of affordable housing. But Representative Johnson has dedicated her career to serving individuals who are facing challenges. She serves the 5th district, and she's the Senate or the representative who is the chair of the housing committee in the House. She's currently the executive director of Elwyn, which is one of the nation's oldest nonprofit organizations. And in that role, she works directly with individuals and communities. One of her strengths is that she has an intimate understanding of the impact that Delaware's lack of affordable housing has on cost-burdened households. So when you speak to her about affordable housing issues, she absolutely understands what we're saying. So we've invited her here today as a representative from our House of Representatives, as a chair of a housing committee, and as an advocate for affordable housing to discuss issues around affordable housing in Delaware. Again, just a reminder for those who have joined us, if you'd like to ask Representative Johnson a question, please put that question in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and kind of collecting questions as we go. Also, Representative Johnson, you should have the ability to share your screen. Again, for us tech-in savvy people, if you'd like to make sure you see Representative Johnson while she's speaking, you can choose speaker view on your computer. So with that, Representative Johnson, you can share your screen if you'd like to, or begin speaking. We're really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Sarah. I will not be sharing a screen. I have my notes actually in the background here, so I'll be looking at the camera and looking at my notes all at the same time. I figured, you know, let me not do a share screen at this point, considering we're nearing the end and I want to keep you guys engaged. And it's close to lunch, so like this is really hard. And then add to it, I had the pleasure of listening to Senator Pinckney for the last 15 minutes. I said, let me just jump on and see what's going on. And honestly, I thought, well, my work is done. She's answered all the questions. So I am going to start. And Sarah, since you are an amazing timekeeper, that is wonderful. I am going to ask you, because I was going to put my my timer on, and so that it would make a sound that I needed to stop talking regardless of where I was, because I really want to engage with the community. I really want to hear from them and get some ideas, because guess what? I don't know everything and I am still learning every single day. So I'll try not to speak too quickly. So Sarah, I'm going to say 15 minutes. If that...
I have you. I got you. I'll interrupt you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So affordable housing. And the question I asked myself, is it out of reach? Like, is it? And yes, it is. And what can we do as a state to change that? What I will tell you this is that it requires every last one of us to be engaged. Even though I am a legislator, I can't do anything by myself. I require the advocacy of our community to connect not only with me, but to also connect with every other legislator and share your ideas about how we move forward. So the first thing I wanted to start with, and you'll just have to bear with me, I'm a little geek about this, but Senator Pinckney may enjoy this. My first question is this: who knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You can raise your hand. Yes, 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 yes. I had to start there. I just had to. I think it's just so very important. You know, I think about what is on the bottom of that pyramid, the lowest levels of the pyramid that are made up of the most basic needs, while the most complex ones, of course, are at the top. At the bottom, really just hones in on, I think, just every aspect of life. And I'm certain that most of us feel the same way. The bottom of the pyramid are the basic requirements, basic food, water, warmth, stable housing. Once those lower level needs have been met, then people can move on and move towards self-actualization. So just think for a moment, if your basic needs are not met, what do you do now? You feel hopeless. I chose to start here because what we all need to know, and I know that we all know this, is that you can't move to the next level. You cannot achieve self-actualization if your most basic needs are not met. So just for a second, think about a person who was experiencing housing insecurity and how, while you think, okay, that person has that issue, but it is connected to every single aspect of your life. And not only your life, the lives of the individuals that rely on you as well. And that's pretty heavy. So if you don't have stable housing and you're a mother, then what does that do for your children? We are all connected here, and everything starts with our most basic needs. I'll share a statistic with you. In order to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent in Delaware, full-time workers need to earn, you ready for this? $21.96 per hour. This is Delaware's 2020 housing wage. It is the 17th highest housing wage in our country. The minimum income necessary to afford a 2-bedroom rental unit in Delaware per month is a little over $3,000, and annually, a little over $45,000. At Delaware, at our minimum wage, a renter would need to work 2.5 full-time jobs, or over 95 hours a week to afford rent. That is crazy. I'm going to share with you some statistics that I imagine you already know, and mad shout outs to Housing Alliance Delaware for providing this information so that I can just push it out. So I just want to hit a few of these bullets because I don't want to run out of time and I want to get to your questions. So what we know, Delaware faces a shortage of over 19,000 rental homes available for our extremely low income renters. 25% of renter households in Delaware are extremely low income renter households. These households are extremely cost burdened, which means that they have to make difficult decisions every single day. Decisions that include food, healthcare, medications, and other necessities. And you're juggling all of that with your housing needs. The other thing is that we know this. COVID has just slammed us. COVID really exasperated all the things that we already knew as it relates to housing instability and evictions. And we'll talk about a little bit about evictions a little later. The sad thing is this, is that in our beautiful state, our beautiful small state at that, we only have 36 affordable housing units available for every 100 renters households. That is really sad. More than 53,000 households experience severe housing problems due to the shortage of housing for our low and very low individuals. Excuse me. A major cause for our housing crisis today is the mismatch between growing housing costs and stagnant incomes for people who have the lowest incomes. Since 1960, renters' incomes have increased, renters' incomes, yes, have increased by 5%, while rents have risen to 61%. That makes no sense, yet that is the reality that we are living in. Despite comparatively high rates of home ownership in Delaware continues to be out of reach for our low-income households, period. And we all know this. The rates of home ownership are significantly lower for extremely low incomes. And of course, for individuals who are Black and brown communities. It is almost like not almost, the American dream has gone awry for these individuals. So where do we go from here? And actually, before I go to that, one of the things that I wanted to share with you quickly, and while yes, being the chair of housing is important to me, and knowing the statistics and connecting with the advocates, Sarah shared that I work for LWIM, and in my role as the executive director, this happened maybe 2 years ago. I have this thing, I need to be early for all things. So I show up to the office at 7 o'clock in the morning. I like to be the first one and the last one out. Show up, I pull up to the parking lot, and the strangest thing, there was a car in the parking lot. Someone actually got to the office before I did. I looked in that car, and the car was filled with clothes. And I thought, well, that's weird. And I thought, well, who would be here before me? And I just went on about my business. Later, I learned that one of my employees who was working at our LWIM building was homeless. She could not afford the rent. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. It's been a couple of years, and it still hits, because you think no one should work the way they do and not be able to have affordable housing and then end up being homeless. And that hit me so hard when I learned her story, and it broke my heart, because in that moment, I knew that affordable housing was out of reach for her, and she was trying to make it in the regular landscape as if she made $50,000. And that put her at risk, and it also put her children at risk. So I'm sorry, I get a little emotional when I think about that, but when you have those moments and you see it up front, it is a call for change. I will share this with you. Once I was made aware and given permission to actually speak with the young lady, I connected her with services, and ultimately she did find housing. So that is a good thing. How am I doing on time, Sarah?
Well, I wasn't going to interrupt you for another couple minutes, but we have so many questions. So if you would like to stop, it's up to you.
This is what I'll do. I'll share this with you really quickly. And that's why I wanted you to be the timekeeper. So, okay, I'll share this. 1 second, I'm sorry. Let me get back to my notes really quickly. So, okay, my question to you guys before we start talking is, where do we go from here? And I need each and every one of you, and we, of course, we're short for time here, but please connect with me outside of this opportunity and share your thoughts and ideas of where we go from here as a state to make sure that we have affordable housing for the individuals who live here. And add to this, we can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. I want and need your help. So one of the things that actually I'm working with Senator Pinckney and Senator Townsend is the prime on a piece of legislation that helps a little. It helps a little. it's not the cure-all, but what it is it's Senate Bill 101. And what that will do is that it is a piece of legislation that will provide tenants right to counsel during evictions. And that in itself is going to be huge. I'm going to stop there because I've got a whole lot more to say about that, but I will say go online, read Senate Bill 101. It will be very helpful. So I'll stop now. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you for supporting Senate Bill 101. I think everyone here sees that as very important to provide right to counsel in evictions. I'm going to ask you compound questions, just like I did Senator Pinckney, because we have so many questions coming in and so many kind of that are circling some of the same issues. So I'm going to start with how you started. You started talking to us about cost-burdened households and the difficult choices that people are making. So we've had a couple questions around the housing wage. First is, we have a bill to increase the minimum wage in Delaware to $15 an hour. Are you supportive of that? How about a basic universal income to support folks? How could we make that happen? And also, Simone Turner made a wonderful comment about how paying people a living wage is important, right? And that people are trying to make it go on minimum wage without benefits. It has an effect not only on finances, not only on their ability to get housing, but also mental, emotional well-being. And that stress is real. That physical wear and tear is real. And so she was just pointing out, you know, it's not just money, it's not just housing, it's also health. And we need to make sure that we keep that in mind. So kind of our questions are you supportive of an increase in minimum wage? How about a living wage? How about a universal basic income? What can we do in Delaware to make sure people can afford their housing?
Okay, am I supportive of a $15 minimum wage? I am definitely supportive, but more than that, I am supportive of a livable wage, because while yes, $15 will make a difference, it helps, right? It's not livable. I mean, it'll make life a little easier, but we still have so much work to do. Related to the universal wage, I'd have to do additional research regarding that. But I am all for individuals having a livable wage, because as the person in the chat, you know, pointed out, all of these things are connected. It's not just the money, not just money, it's not just housing, it's every single aspect of your life. And it definitely impacts your mental health well-being, your self-esteem. And we need that armor every single day, don't we? So.
Thank you. Thank you for your support of the minimum wage and a living wage and a housing wage. We all, I think, in this room appreciate how important that is. All right, so Melanie Brown in the chat said, what can be done to make renting more affordable? It is so unfair. And we all can agree with that. Cheyenne Miller continued that thought with all the money coming from the American Rescue Funds, how are you going to advocate to ensure that money goes to creating more affordable housing? Can we increase public housing? Can we increase housing vouchers? Can we build more housing? What can we do in Delaware to ensure that housing is here and affordable?
I think what we can do, and it's funny because you've answered all the questions. Everything that you laid out are all the things that we can do. I will add to that though. We can't do it alone. We require your energy and your advocacy to put the pressure on and to keep the pressure on, because this is real. And, you know, Senator Pinckney just talked about it a little bit. talked about housing, but also talked about this week right now, Joint Finance Committee. We live in such an amazing state where you're literally a phone call, an email, a text away from your legislators. And what I would say is that you have to make sure that the people who represent you know what is important to you. Yes, I can and will go and have conversations with people who understand the plight and who want to see change, but that's just Representative Kendra Johnson having private conversations, trying to persuade some who aren't there, and and then of course the others who are with us. But remember, ultimately, the power starts with you. It starts with you being relentless, saying, these are the things that need to change. And enough legislators hear that, then we're like, okay, let's figure some stuff out. Add to it, guess what? In your advocacy, if you, by chance have the expertise to create policies and legislation, send it our way. Let's look it over. Let's see what we can do together.
Thank you for including us in your work. I think we're all hoping to move forward together to make sure we find solutions to all of these problems.
It's essential.
Yeah. So Dr. Michelle Williams said we need to build the missing middle of housing types, but Sarah Kiefer reminded us that there are local zoning regulations, and we all know that gentrification is a real issue across the state of Delaware. What policies and solutions would you support to ensure that when communities grow economically, that all families get to participate in that growth, that no families are displaced, and that everyone has access to housing?
Wow, that's heavy. So while at a very high level, I certainly can advocate for those type of policies to ensure that housing, and fair housing is available for everyone, and that, like she also talked about gentrification. One of the things that I think really is the catalyst for all things that I do is the involvement in the community. I always think I don't want to just have a particular issue and only have my own set of beliefs around that issue. So I always go out to others to say, well, what does this mean? What does it look like? And how do we do this together? And that's the thing, that's the one thing and the first thing that I always do. And then from moving from that place, move towards policy, because I will not put myself up to be an authority on all things, all situations, and all experiences. But am I willing to take your experiences and weave it into policy so that we can move together? Absolutely.
Thank you. So Dawn Hall brought up that there are many families in the education system who are identified under McKinney-Vento as being homeless. They're doubled or tripled up, living with families and friends. We don't always see those families in other parts of our homeless service system, but we know that there are many families that are facing homelessness, that are unhoused, and that they're seeking access to affordable housing. How can we use the American Rescue Funds or use state dollars to address the needs of those homeless families?
So as we're, we're in joint finance right now, it's funding. It's funding. I don't know who, someone says this, and I believe it to be true, and I've said the same thing myself in trying to create budgets for my organization. Show me your budget, and that tells me what your priorities are, plain and simple. So this issue has to be a priority in our budget. It starts there. If we don't have the funding and the commitment, we continue to have these type of conversations. I want our conversations to begin to evolve.
Well, I think that is probably the perfect note to end on. I'd love to give you the opportunity to tell us, you are the co-chair of the Housing Committee in the House. How do you think that we can work to serve you, to serve affordable housing statewide? Is there any call to action that you would like us to hear before we end today?
So I think I have weaved it into almost everything that I've said, okay? We need you. We need you to keep pushing and keep this at the forefront. Sarah, like, I want you guys to come to me and say, this is what we have going on. Let's talk about this. How can we implement, I found this over in New Jersey. How can we implement this here in Delaware? We have to continue to have those conversations and turn thoughts and ideas into meaningful policies and legislation that changes people's lives. So stay connected. My email, Kendra, Kendra, Johnson, JOHNSON @delaware.gov.
Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. I just put Representative Johnson's email in our chat box. We have been having a robust conversation today. I hope that it doesn't end. I'm going to hand it off to Rachel Stucker, the Executive Director of Housing Alliance Delaware, to kind of say a final word on the Day for Housing.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. As Sarah just said, it doesn't and shouldn't end here. I know that many of you are doing either direct client work, helping people find shelter, helping people find housing, helping people increase their incomes, building affordable housing. There are so many different people here today. All of you play such an important role in this work, and it doesn't end here. It didn't start here for you all, that's for sure. You do this every day. But when I say it doesn't end here, what I mean is, I'm going to say what Representative Johnson just said: contact your legislators, contact the people who are making decisions about what the priorities are here in our state. If there's anything we've learned this past year, and I think many of us here already knew this, but I think if there's anything the global we have learned, so we here in Delaware as an entire state, we as in this nation, that housing is not something that can be overlooked. Housing is not something that we can take advantage of and assume will meet people's needs. It needs action. It needs to be addressed. And as Representative Johnson said, without us reaching out and contacting the people who are making decisions, it will not rise to that priority level here in our state. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I look forward to seeing you all next year in person with some bagels. I prefer mine with cream cheese, but we'll have some other options for you as well. I'm so pleased to be working with all of you this past year and to continue to do that going forward. We're only ending 1 minute late, so thank you, Sarah, for all of your work putting this event together, and everyone else who helped us do this and helps us with our work every day. Our role is to bring the community together on these issues. I hope that you find value in it. We find value in you, and I look forward to continue to working with all of you. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Kevin. Bye, Kevin.